In this video, we're going to look at how to use Desmos, which would be our graphing calculator, in terms of using a table feature and doing point of intersection, and make sure that you have the notes for the Desmos table feature and point of intersection handy as we go through this. So the first thing we want to do is we want to identify our input and our output, and we notice right away that our input variable is y and our output variable is P, and so we know that P is going to be the percent of women age 65 living alone, and the input Y is the years since 1930. And so now our table is going to be able to be used so that we can evaluate. So a table is to evaluate. So this would be P of 30, P of say 66, and so this is a quick way of generating all the input value or the output values giving any particular input. So using the table is the same thing as evaluating. The other thing we want to note is that our variables for our function are y and p as an ordered pair, and our calculator, our graphing calculator or our Desmos, really only understands x and y. So we're going to be using x and y instead of p and y, or y and p actually, as our variables. So we want to generate this table, and then we're going to graph the function, but we also need to know whether it's discrete or continuous. And so we're going to go over here to Desmos, and we're going to just type in the equation. And again, this time we want to use y equals, and then type in your function, negative 0.00017, and now x raised, or if you're on your cell phone, the raised key, let me see if I can get this, is the A to the B key is your raised key. If you're on a computer, then it's just the caret symbol, or you can use the A to the B as well. And then your x squared or a squared is right there. Your x's are here, x and y is there as well. So this is to the third power. And then I need to use a right arrow key so that I get it back in line. And so when it's first done, it's up at the top, it still has an exponent, and the right arrow key gives you back in line. And so go ahead and finish typing that in. And you'll notice that the length of the screen kind of extends a little bit as you're typing in the whole thing, and so you can very easily double check that you typed it in correctly. And so now when you're at this point, you can hit enter if you want, and so you kind of get a next line. Now you want to go up to the gear, and notice that I want to convert that line to a table, and so I'm just going to hit table. And now we've created a table using that function, and now I only have to do is I'm just going to go through and I'm going to edit each one of these. And so 0, 30, and since I am telling it what input values I want, 48, 66, 77, it is automatically generating my output values, and then 84, and I have all the input values that were given to me and the output values that have now been generated, and so I can write these down in my list over here. So 8.93, and if we just round to 2 decimal places, we can fill these in. So I want to talk quickly about discrete or continuous before we graph our function, simply because we want to know whether we want to connect the points or not. So is the years, can the years be broken up into fractional pieces that make sense? And the answer is yes. And can the percent of women be broken up? And since it's talking about percent and not women as a number, we're talking about the percent, then that too can be broken up. And so this graph is continuous, and so we're going to be able to connect the points. So go ahead and draw your... So my graph kind of came out like this. Looks like I overextended the axes. And so we, what we want to do is make sure that we sketch a better graph. So we're going to use a graphing calculator, and Desmos in this case. But before we use Desmos, we want to adjust our window. And there's a unique way to do it in Desmos, and we'll talk about it in just a second. But your window, just to understand, is your graphing calculator graph paper. So the graphing calculator doesn't know where you want to graph this. It is just going to create graphs no matter where it is, but we want to be able to see it. So we need to tell it where the graph paper is. And so although you're using Desmos and you can easily navigate it by using either the cursor or your fingers, we always want to make sure that we have an appropriate window so that we really see what's going on. And so we can look by our axes that's given to us. So remember that the input, our X is our input axes, our Y's are output axes, and the scale is the count by. And so if we look at this particular axis, it's going from -10 as our first input value, and our last input value looks to be 110, and it's counting by tens. And then our Y, or our output axes, which is our P axis, so this is not Y, but for our calculator it understands this is Y. So it's 0, and then 40, and it looks that we're counting by fives. And so now in Desmos, so I am going to move this, minimize this over. Okay, minimized it a little bit. I'm going to minimize it one more time just so I can hide the list and have a little more space here. The wrench up here, so as you know, as you played around, you can use your fingers on your cell phone to scroll around, or if you use your cursor and hold down, you can move this graph paper around, except that we still don't have a nice picture based on what we see, what we hand drew. So we want to go to our wrench, and then we're going to change our input axes to -10. We said 110, and we're counting by tens. And then our output axes, we wanted it to be 0 and up to 40, and count it by fives. And now I just want to click off and not move anything. And so now I should have a picture very similar to the picture that I had drawn by hand. And so we can see where our points are, and then it's continued down, and we can kind of read down here, and it looks like it's 100, between 100 and 110. And my graph, when I drew it, I went over the axes, so I know that my graph is probably not correct. But we're going to use our graph to help us answer some questions now. So the first thing I want to do is I want to use the graph to answer the question of solve when 6, so this is our percent. So when the percent is 6, what is the input? Or what is the year? So that's what that question is asking. And so we want to use our graph. So we're going to go back up to our graph. And I'm going to use, and just kind of try and draw this line. We've done this in the past. And draw that over. And it looks like, in terms of my graph, it looks like probably 108. And so I'm going to go back down. And I am going to answer this question. So I'm thinking that the Y value is 108, and I want to write this as an ordered pair. So that means that we have the input value of 108 and the output value of 6. We want to see how accurate this is. And so in our Y1 right now, or in our, and it's just called Y in Desmos, is our equation, and so except that it's sitting right here. So what we want to do is we want to so we know that our equation has already been typed in, and so our equation is here in what we consider Y1, and then the other output, Y2, is our 6, and so in Desmos we're going to, in the second line, just Y equals 6, and notice that it graphs this line, and we can just highlight, and if you'll notice that it gets closer to, and it'll actually okay, so even though we can see the point of intersection, we're not going to get it to actually find it very easily. So what we need to do is redraw this particular graph, and so we can just go y equals, and you can go up and copy from the equation or retype it, and we're going to put it into our new y, and you'll notice it changed colors because and you can see there's a faint point right there, and if you just click on it, now we have the exact answer that's given to us as 103.15, comma 6. So we know that 6 equals P of 103.15, or we could say y equals 103.15 years. So then the other question we have is the horizontal intercept, and if we recall, the horizontal intercept is some value, some input value, comma 0. So so we have the equation still, and this time we know the output value is going to be 0, and so with Desmos I can just go and instead of our y equals 6, I can change that to y equals 0, and again I can see the faint point there. Click on the point, it will hold it, and so I now have the value of y equals 106 years. Remember that a horizontal intercept is something 0, so I've got to 106, comma 0. Recall also that we would be solving the equation 0 equals P of y. So the practical domain of this function is our years sent, so 0 less than or equal to y, and our least amount or most amount would be 106 years, even though that might not be as practical because there probably will never be a percent of 0 women living alone. But using this information, 0 less than or equal to P, and then we want to go back up to our graph, and we can look at our table and see the most amount was 38.33, and so less than or equal to 38.33 would be our practical range because it's talking about the percent. Real quickly, I want to just look at this couple parts of the next problem. So if it says solve algebraically, that means that the -2 is the output value, and I want to find the input value of P, and so it's -2 times P, or equals P times the quantity of P minus 11. So if I divide by 5, so -2/5 equals P minus 11, and then I'm going to add 11, and so I'm going to get, and I can just go to Desmos over here and let Desmos take -2 divided by 5 and add 11, and you'll see the answer is 10.6, so we know P equals 10.6. And so then we want to verify by doing the intersection, and so your equation would be 5x minus 11 times the quantity, and that's how we came up with this table. It's y would equal 5 times the quantity of x minus 11, remembering that our calculator only understands x's and y's. And in the output, we want the value of -2. This last piece again is your windows, and if we look at our table, we have -78, so maybe we want to go from, so we have -4.6, so maybe -5, to, we have to go to 20, so maybe 25, maybe count by 5s, so then maybe -100 to 50, count by 25s, and then just a justification of why you are picking these numbers.